India's Act East policy relies on robust trade corridors into Southeast Asia. The geopolitical threshold for this strategy is the 1,643-kilometer border shared with Myanmar. Accessing that border requires moving goods through the state of Manipur. The region serves as the primary geographic gateway, heavily dependent on the Imphal-Dimapur and Imphal-Silchar highways to sustain economic flow. As of April 2026, Manipur is navigating a fragile transition out of a year of direct peasants' rule. Those vital highways face frequent blockades, and transnational trade at the border has been severed. Internally, the cost of the past 3 years is severe. Official metrics report over 260 fatalities and the ongoing displacement of more than 60,000 residents across the state. A collapse of this magnitude does not emerge from spontaneous localized violence. It is the result of deep structural and geographic pressures overwhelming the administrative capacity of the state. We start with geography. The central Imphal Valley is occupied by the Meitei. The surrounding hills are Kuki-Zo and Naga domains. This creates a spatial imbalance. The 10% valley floor holds the vast population majority and controls 40 of 60 legislative seats. This geographic funnel inherently limits expansion. The physical constraint forces the growing populations into a zero-sum competition over land, resources, and political representation. A 2023 infrastructure study allows us to quantify exactly how that geographic imbalance translates into economic reality. The valley districts, particularly around Imphal West and Thoubal, enjoy distinct structural advantages, possessing surfaced highways, consistent electricity, and highly concentrated healthcare. Contrast this with the hill districts like Churachandpur and Tamenglong. Here, development is heavily reliant on unsurfaced roads, irregular power, and a severe healthcare deficit, including a 40% shortfall in community health centers. This physical divide is tied directly to a legal friction point, originating from Manipur's 1949 merger with the Union of India, specifically regarding Scheduled Tribe, or ST, protections. The Meitei community argues they were recognized as a historical tribe prior to 1949. Without current ST status, they report feeling legally vulnerable and lacking constitutional protection regarding land ownership in their own ancestral valley. Conversely, the Hill communities view the 1949 merger as a definitive historical baseline. They see current ST protections as their sole legal defense mechanism against the economic and political dominance of the valley residents. Long before the violence of 2023, the combination of stark infrastructural disparity and unresolved legal anxiety had established a highly combustible baseline. All it required was an external catalyst. That catalyst arrived from across the eastern border. In 2021, a military coup in neighboring Myanmar threw the country into a full-scale civil war. This devastating conflict forced a massive wave of Chin Kuki refugees to flee and cross the porous eastern border into Manipur. For Meitei leaders in the valley, this influx triggered deep anxieties regarding unregulated immigration and the potential destabilization of the state's demographic balance. In response to the escalating crisis, the Indian central government instituted a major policy shift in February 2024 by scrapping the decades-old free movement regime, which had previously allowed border tribes to cross freely up to 16 kilometers. By 2026, the state implemented a strict security protocol, introducing biometric passes and laying the groundwork for a 100-kilometer smart fencing system along the border. This physical barrier faces intense resistance. Kuki-Zo and Naga organizations argue the fence divides families and cultures based on an arbitrary colonial line, violating their birthright to a contiguous tribal homeland. State policies designed to curb the influx of refugees and armed militants ended up validating the deepest territorial fears of the frontier communities. By April 2026, the nature of the conflict evolved. The initial violence between the Meitei and the Kuki-Zo expanded geographically and demographically into previously neutral territory. The shift accelerated in the Ukhrul district, an area traditionally dominated by the Naga tribes. On April 18th, 2 Tangkhul Naga men were killed in an ambush, allegedly carried out by Kuki militants. The institutional reaction was immediate. The United Naga Council called for a total shutdown across their districts, demanding that Nagas suspend all social and economic ties with the Kuki-Zo. But the underlying driver here is territory. Naga organizations actively oppose Kuki-Zo demands for a separate administration because the proposed boundaries overlap directly with land the Nagas claim as their ancestral domain. Trust in the current political apparatus has evaporated among the hill tribes, who believe the state government is unable to protect their sovereign interests. Territorial disputes over sovereign tribal boundaries now define the conflict's expansion, shifting the focus away from the initial friction over affirmative action. To manage the violence, the central government has blanketed Manipur in a complex security grid, deploying roughly 36,000 central armed police forces across the state. But relying strictly on troop density leaves the region vulnerable. While security forces recovered over 3,000 looted weapons during the 2025 administration, the withdrawal of 8,500 personnel for election duties in West Bengal in April 2026 immediately created a security vacuum. Heavy militarization has failed to resolve the internal humanitarian reality. Tens of thousands of residents remain stranded in congested relief camps, lacking adequate medical care. This chart tracks the resettlement progress under the new administration. While the government has successfully relocated approximately 16,500 individuals and set a target to close all camps by the end of 2026, the majority remain displaced. This exposes the core security paradox. Massive deployments can suppress clashes, but cannot manufacture the trust required for civilians to safely return home. The December 2026 resettlement deadline faces a hard physical constraint. You cannot return minority populations to regions that have fragmented into hardened, ethnically homogeneous enclaves. Years of weakened justice systems and a perceived lack of accountability for past violence have created a void where political dialogue between Meitei, Kuki, and Naga leaders cannot currently survive. Firm analytical. Addressing the proliferation of these recovered and remaining weapons is a prerequisite for stability. A strict disarmament policy targeting all ethnic militias is required to de-escalate the violence, but the long-term solution requires abandoning the purely security-centric approach. Stability depends on inclusive development policies that systematically close the severe infrastructure and healthcare gaps between the Central Valley and the surrounding hills. On a geopolitical scale, securing the Myanmar border against illegal trafficking is necessary, but the implementation of fencing and biometric passes must accommodate the existing kinship ties of the frontier communities. Heavy military overlays will not resolve a conflict driven by geography and resource allocation. Until the state is rebuilt on systemic equity, the internal fractures will persist, indefinitely stalling India's broader strategic ambitions in the East.